Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos.
The main character, after dying in his previous life, wakes up inside of Game of Thrones and he goes on the path of becoming the Pirate King. What will that do to Game of Thrones?
Game of Thrones, The Road to Pirate King. Chapter 1: The Dead, the Immortal. Huang Zhengdao's last memory was of that black wall in the South China Sea that stretched from the sky to the sea. One moment, only muffled thunder rolled deep within the leaden clouds. The sea breeze, carrying a salty, damp scent, caressed his skin, and the water rippled gently, supporting his athletic, muscular body. The next moment, the sky seemed to be torn apart by an invisible giant hand, and an inky curtain of rain poured down, icy and bone-chilling, instantly blurring the world. The gale was no longer just wind. It was countless invisible, violent whips lashing the sea, whipping up ferocious waves. The once familiar and comforting seawater had now transformed into a churning, roaring beast, each wave carrying immense force, crashing down and greedily dragging him into the abyss. The will to survive burned in his bones and blood, squeezing out the strength of every muscle fiber. Huang Zhengdao struggled to kick the water, but each swing of his arm felt like struggling in viscous asphalt. The icy seawater filled his mouth and nose, the salty and fishy smell assaulting his brain, almost suffocating him. With all his strength, he finally managed to break through the surface, only to be met by an even more terrifying wave that crashed down on him, shoving him back underwater. Huang Zhengdao's ears were filled with a dull roar, and before his eyes was a murky darkness filled with countless bubbling bubbles. His lungs felt like they were being tightly gripped by iron clamps, burning with pain. He instinctively paddled upwards, breaking through the heavy curtain of water, but just as he touched a bit of thin air, he was seized by another, even more insidious force. Less than 100 meters from the golden beach, ripped apart by the fierce winds, the sea suddenly collapsed. A gigantic whirlpool silently opened its dark maw. The seawater swirled and plunged wildly, forming a bottomless funnel. The suction force surpassed the limits of physics, carrying a soul-chilling greed. Huang Zhengdao felt his body lighten instantly. All his struggles became futile and laughable. He was violently dragged down by that irresistible force, like a helpless leaf falling into the abyss. The icy, bone-chilling seawater pressed in from all directions, making my bones seem to groan. The last bit of air in my lungs was mercilessly squeezed out, turning into a string of desperate bubbles that quickly disappeared into the distant, ever-dimming light overhead. Absolute darkness embraced him, so heavy it was suffocating. At the edge of utter extinguished consciousness, in that depths of all-consuming cold and deathly silence, a voice, or rather a thought, as ancient as layers of rock deposited on the seabed for millions of years, carrying the salty, rusty smell of the sea and a kind of inhuman grandeur, was directly imprinted on the core of his collapsing consciousness. The deceased are not dead. It will surely rise again. Its momentum is even stronger. That sound was not heard by the ears, but rather etched into the soul. It had no direction, no source, only an indifferent, timeless declaration. At the same instant, at the other end of the world, in the heart of the Iron Islands, beneath the Greyjoy family's rocky fortress on Pike Island, a biting sea wind howled across the jagged black rocks, whipping up icy spray that lashed the faces of the people standing on the shore. The air was thick with the pungent smell of sea salt and fish, and an almost frozen, chilling atmosphere. At the heart of the crowd stood Corin Greyjoy, patriarch of House Grey. Tall and imposing, his face etched with the deep marks of sea winds and the passage of time, his eyes hard as a rock, yet carrying a hint of the nervous anticipation of a new father. Beside him stood his eldest son, Baron Greyjoy. Baron was only 12, his slender frame already displaying the distinctive sharp angles of the Greyjoy family. His thin lips were tightly pressed together, his sharp eyes, inherited from his father, fixed intently ahead, striving to mimic his father's composed demeanor. But his slightly clenched fists and somewhat rapid breathing betrayed his inner turmoil. This was the moment his younger brother was about to be born and face his test. There were only a few people around, two solemn-looking drowned priests, and Harag, Corran's most trusted captain's assistant. The altar is a naturally formed, smooth groove in a huge reef. At this moment, it is filled with icy, frothy seawater. The high priest, an old man with white hair and beard, soaking wet, but with eyes burning with fanatical fire, stood barefoot in waist-deep water. In his rough, bark-like hands, he cradled an infant wrapped in a dark grey, rough seaweed cloth, Corran's second son, Euron Greyjoy, who had just been born. Drowning God! The old priest's voice was hoarse and high-pitched, piercing through the howling sea wind. Have pity on your humble creation. Grant him the hardness of the Iron People. Grant him the breath of the sea. Let him undergo your baptism, return from death stronger. Harder. The chanting reached its climax. The old priest took a deep breath and suddenly lowered his arms. The icy, death-laden seawater instantly swallowed the tiny swaddling clothes, submerging the newborn's tender, rosy face. There were no cries, only a few weak, submerged bubbles struggling to rise from the gaps in the swaddling cloth, only to burst shortly after. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Time seemed to stand still amidst the howling wind and crashing waves. Chieftain Corran involuntarily held his breath, his broad shoulders hunched slightly forward, his gaze fixed on the churning water, his tension written all over his furrowed brow and clenched fists. 12-year-old Baron didn't dare blink, his small body as stiff as a stone, his nails digging almost into his palms. Captain Harag's expression was grave, his hand resting on the hilt of the dagger at his waist. Another younger priest nervously swallowed. Fine beads of sweat trickled down the old priest's forehead, mingling with the cold seawater. He felt the small body in his arms completely stop struggling, becoming cold and limp, like a dead fish pulled from the deep sea. A heavy despair began to permeate his fanatical eyes. Cold, dark, suffocating, Wang Zhengdao felt himself being crushed, dissolved, his consciousness like a wisp of smoke about to dissipate. Just as his consciousness was about to completely vanish into nothingness, the suction force from the abyss that had dragged him into the vortex suddenly reversed. It was as if an invisible giant hand reached into the cold abyss, precisely seized his remnant soul, and then, with an irresistible, all-tearing force, yanked it outward. Boom! It wasn't sound. It was an indescribable, violent collision and compression at the level of the soul. He felt as if he had been forcibly shoved into an extremely narrow, cold, rigid container that was rapidly losing its last vestiges of life. A violent sense of rejection, like a million red-hot steel needles, pierced through the cracks of his soul. Strange nerve endings transmitted a suffocating, deathly sensation, a chilling feeling, and a faint yet fiercely resentful, primal, and violent remnant of consciousness tearing and resisting his intrusion. Gulp! Just as the infant's body in the old priest's arms became completely cold and stiff, and the light of hope in Corran's eyes was about to be extinguished, and Baron subconsciously took a half-step back, an extremely faint and extremely strange sound came from the seawater-soaked swaddling clothes. The old priest's arm trembled violently. Immediately afterwards, the small, bluish-purple body convulsed violently. Cough, cough. Well, the grey seaweed cloth covering the baby was suddenly torn open, and a stream of murky seawater mixed with mucus shot out from the baby's mouth and nose like a small fountain. It sprayed the unsuspecting old priest's face. Immediately, a loud and piercing cry, truly belonging to a baby, ripped through the howling sea wind and exploded in everyone's ears. Wow! The cries were filled with terror, pain, and an indescribable bewilderment of someone who had survived a catastrophe. The deathly silence surrounding the altar was shattered completely. Chieftain Corrin gasped sharply, his tall frame swaying. His face drained of color, replaced by overwhelming elation and disbelief. He instinctively took a step forward. 12-year-old Baron, on the other hand, seemed stunned by the sudden cry. His face was deathly pale, his eyes wide, his body frozen in place. All his imitation and composure vanished, leaving only the terror of a child facing something beyond comprehension. Captain Harag let out a low gasp, and the young priest trembled with excitement. The despair on the old priest's face was instantly replaced by a near-mad crimson. He trembled violently with excitement. He suddenly lifted the infant high above his head, roaring with all his might, his voice distorted by extreme excitement and awe, echoing through the wind and waves. Look, people of the Ironlands. Look, the drowning goddess has appeared. She has bestowed a miracle. The icy seawater flowed down his raised arm, dripping onto the baby's violently heaving, mucus-covered chest. The baby's cries gradually weakened, leaving only rapid, relieved breaths. His newly opened eyes, under the astonished gazes of the crowd, displayed a chillingly strange color. His left eye was a deep, dark black, as if it could absorb all light. His right eye was a cold, azure blue, like the purest surface of the sea before a storm. The drowned god has chosen this child. The old priest's voice was like a blood-soaked horn, fanatical and hoarse. Grant my lord rebirth. This is the drowned god's incarnation among mortals. He is the hope for the Iron Islands' future. He is proof that the dead are not truly dead and will surely rise again. The dead are not truly dead. They will rise again, and with even greater force, the old priest himself shouted again. Captain Harag and the young priest knelt down in fervor, their foreheads striking the cold, slippery rocks, repeating the sacred prayer. The dead are not dead. They will rise again with even greater force. Chieftain Corrin did not kneel immediately. He strode forward and almost snatched the infant, whose cries were growing weaker and whose chest was heaving violently, from the old priest's hands. His rough fingers carefully brushed away the sticky seawater and mucus from the infant's face, his fingertips trembling almost imperceptibly as they touched the cold, slippery little body. His gaze, like that of the most experienced captain examining a surviving chart after a storm, swept heavily and sharply over the infant's heterochromatic eyes. The left eye as black as an abyss that swallowed all light, the right eye as blue as the most frigid sea before a storm. There was no fatherly tenderness in them, only a heavy, complex scrutiny, as if instantly bearing the future of the entire Iron Islands. Corrin Greyjew's deep voice drowned out the priest's fervor as he lifted the wailing, flailing infant high above his head, proclaiming with unquestionable authority and the exhilaration of surviving a close call. This is my son, the Ironblood of House Greyjoy, Euron Greyjoy. Euron Greyjoy, the others joined in chanting his name, celebrating the birth of the Iron Islands' second son. Corrin turned and handed Euron to Baron, instructing him, "Take your brother back to the castle, wrap him in a warm lambskin, and then give him to your mother." 12-year-old Baron stared at his heterochromatic-eyed younger brother in his arms, like a small reef frozen by the sea breeze. He watched as his father received his resurrected brother from the priest, seeing in his father's eyes a complex light he had never seen before, a mixture of ecstasy and heavy worry. He looked at his brother's strange, unsettling heterochromatic eyes, and a cold, unfamiliar feeling like an undercurrent in the deep sea quietly washed over young Baron's heart for the first time. His emotions were complicated. The excitement of a blood relative being born, the excitement of becoming a big brother for the first time, coupled with a vague sense of wariness and rejection, as if his territory had been invaded and his attention taken away. The cold waves crashed against the rocky altar, and the murky seawater swayed in the trough, reflecting the kneeling priest and captain, the solemn chieftain Corin holding his baby, and the eldest son Baron, who stood alone on the shore with a complex and ever-changing gaze. Deep within that small body, which had just experienced the cycle of life and death, two completely different souls, Huang Zhengdao from another world and Yuren Greyjay, who died at birth, were slowly and irreversibly merging in this cold, salty hell in a painful and eerie way. Their fates, from the very first moment of their arrival, were deeply embedded in the future of the Greyjay family, hanging over the heart of their father, Corin, who sought reform yet clung to miracles, and also casting the first shadow upon the still childish, yet beginning hardening heart of their elder brother, Baron Greyjay. Chapter 2. Euron Grey. Deep within the towering rocky fortress of Pike Island, a stone chamber was barely kept warm by the flickering flames in the fireplace, dispelling the damp chill characteristic of the Iron Islands. The air was thick with the musty smell of parchment, the slight astringency of ink, and the faint salty tang that the sea breeze could never completely wash away. This is the residence and small library of the scholars of Pike Island. 3-year-old Euron Greyjay sat on an oak chair that was too big for him, his feet dangling in the air. He was wrapped in a thick wool sweater, which made his chubby little face appear even whiter. Most striking were his eyes. His left eye was like a bottomless well, absorbing the light in the room and appearing almost pure black. His right eye was a cold, clear blue, like the sea before a storm. The Iron Islands have always been the poorest of the 7 kingdoms. Clegane, the old Maester of Pike, a white-bearded, slightly hunched old man with still sharp eyes, stood beside him, his cloudy gaze filled with astonishment and a hint of unspoken awe. But our ancestors measured a vast territory far beyond Westeros with longships. Come, let's learn about the great Greyjay family crest today, shall we? Maester Clygon carefully unfurled a thick, dark parchment with worn edges. The image on it exuded a menacing, savage aura. A ferocious sea monster, its thick, coiled tentacles covered in suckers, seemed poised to burst forth from the paper at any moment, dragging everything into the abyss. Heavy scales covered its body, and 2 eyes on its head, one as deep as a starless night, the other as cold as the fiercest sea before a storm, stared intently at the viewer. Against the pure black background, only the sea monster was meticulously depicted with shimmering gold lines, radiating an unsettling majesty even in the dim light. Look, this is the golden sea monster. Maester Clygon's withered fingers gently stroked the parchment with a deliberate reverence. It is a symbol of power, proof that we Ironborn can breathe, fight, and rule beneath the waves. The sea is our hunting ground, and the sea monster is ourselves. He tried to make his voice full of passion that a child could understand. We, House Greyjay, Clygon's voice continued, trying to pull his young master back to reality, are descendants of the Grey King. The Grey King, do you know him? He is a great being older than the children of the forest on the continent of Westeros. Legend has it that he married a mermaid and ruled over all the kingdoms beneath the waves. His blood flows in our veins. The Maester's tone was resolute. Unaware of the turmoil in his young master's heart, Maester Clygon slowly unfurled a yellowed map, a map of the Iron Islands, and referring to the map, began to explain the long history of the Iron Islands to Euron. The Iron Islands are located in Ironborn Bay, in the Sunset Sea, in the western border of Westeros, extending eastward to the Trident River and the Neck. Scattered like torn chains across the Sunset Sea, the Iron Islands consist primarily of 31 islands, with 7 main islands surrounding 21 smaller islands. The 7 main islands are Pike, Great Wick, Old Wick, Harlow, Salt Cliff, Blacktide, and Oak. Some of the 21 smaller islands are used for sheep herding, while others are uninhabited. Pike Isle resembles a broken spear pointing towards the mainland, with the city of Pike perched atop a precipice supported by 3 sea stacks. The crater of Great Wake Isle still smokes, and the ruins of the Grey Sea King's Hall on Old Wake Isle are older than Valyria. Harlow Isle resembles a stranded whale, Salt Cliff Isle is riddled with honeycomb-like caves, and Black Tide Isle is the territory of House Blacktooth. Oak Isle, formerly known as Oakmont Isle, brought unimaginable wealth to the Iron Islands during the reign of House Hall, the Iron Kings, when merchants and trading fleets travelled between Oak Isle and Lannister Harbour, Old Town, and even the free trade city-states. He picked up a charcoal pencil and began sketching on another rough parchment. "Look, young Master Euron, this is our Iron Islands." He drew several crooked circles, like a string of scattered pebbles. "The largest one is our home, Pike Isle. The others are Big Wick, Old Wick, Harlow." He emphasized the circle representing Harlow Isle with his finger. "The mighty Harlow family. They have the best shipyards, capable of building longships that can cleave through storms." His tone was deliberately emphatic. "And here, Great Wake Island." Clygon's charcoal pencil pointed to another slightly larger circle, his tone becoming more cautious, "is inhabited by the Gubbler family. They are descendants of the Blackblood Gubblers, ancient, very proud. They value tradition." He avoided the specific meaning of tradition, only drawing a simple anchor next to it. "Here, Old Wake Island," the charcoal pencil moved, "is the territory of the Drum family. The election of kings. You know, long, long ago, the kings of the Iron Islands weren't born, but elected by all the captains at the election of kings. The Drum family presided over this ancient ceremony. The Meister's tone carried a nostalgic air of glory. And here, Blacktide Island, the Blacks family." He drew a wave at that spot. "They are the most faithful servants of the drowned god, the most fearless warriors of the waves." Finally, the charcoal pencil landed on a solitary little dot at the tip of the western side of Great Wick Island. "Lone Lamp Keep, House Fawin." The Meister paused, as if choked by an invisible sea fog. "Very special, rarely leaving the castle, as mysterious as the sea fog." He drew a small lighthouse symbol. This map, composed of rough lines and symbolic symbols, was Euron's prototype of the world. Pike Island was the core, with the other islands surrounding it like reefs and rocks. Those names, Gubel, Drummer, Blacks, Fawin, were like treacherous shoals marked on a nautical chart, carrying the ineffable weight of Meister Clegin's words, pressing heavily into his nascent understanding. They were inextricably linked to weighty words like power, pride, ancient rituals, devout believers, and mystery. "Lords," Meister Clygon concluded, trying to force a benevolent smile. Like the tentacles of a sea monster reaching out in all directions, the great ship of the Iron Islands must hold fast to the reefs belonging to Greyjoy so that it can sail steadily through the storm. "Lord Corran had another argument with the captains this morning," Meister Clegin sighed, tapping his knuckles on the spot where Lannisport was located. "The third time he's proposed forming a merchant fleet, and the third time it's been opposed." Euron's fingertips traced the sea between the Iron Islands and the mainland on the map. He remembered his father Corran Greyjoy's reform plans, replacing plunder with iron ore trade, replacing paying iron money with dock taxes, and even proposing to build a statue of the Seven in Pike to improve relations with the mainland. These ideas were more terrifying to the Ironborn than the White Walkers. "The Zhugu family says this is blasphemy against the god of drowning," the Meister whispered. "Yesterday, a fisherman carved, 'Strength is better than hard work,' on the Pike Town docks." Euron nodded and said calmly, "This is the motto of our Greyjoy family." The sound of the waves outside the window suddenly became deafening. Euron knew this motto, engraved in the soul of the Greyjoy family. They believed that the drowned god created the Ironborn to seize the wealth of the weak. But at this time, when his father, Corin Greyjoy was proposing reforms, replacing plunder with trade. Carving the Greyjoy family motto on the docks was no flattery, but rather an iron spear pointing at the Greyjoy family, mocking and accusing Corin Greyjoy of betraying the family oath, betraying the traditions of the Iron Islands, and betraying the Ironborn. It was said that the writing was done by fishermen, but on the Iron Islands, fishermen who could write were rarer than three-legged fish. Euron understood this, but didn't say it aloud. As the second son of Chief Greyjoy, he had been the center of attention since birth, the walking embodiment of the drowned god, proof that the dead never die and will rise again, the hope for the future of the Iron Islands, in the old priest's words, and possessing unique heterochromatic eyes, one black and one blue. Almost every Ironborn on the Iron Islands knew Euron's title of Son of the Drowned God. But at the age of 3, he was not yet capable of bearing such titles. A tree that stands out in the forest will be felled by the wind. A mound that rises above the bank will be eroded by the current. A person who excels above others will be criticized by the masses. Euron understood this principle, so he knew he had to learn to hide his abilities before he had enough strength. Less attention meant more chances of survival. Euron would remind himself of this before every word and action. The previous discussion had strayed from the theme of enlightenment, so Maester Clegane shook his head and continued the lesson, his quill sketching key moments in the Iron Islands' history on parchment. 300 years ago, when King Harren the Black built Harrenhal in the Riverlands, we ruled the west coast from Bear Isle to Greenbridge. Until the War of Conquest, Aegon's Dragonfire destroyed the Iron Fleet, and the image of Torren Greyjoy, the subjugated king, kneeling to offer his crown, still stings the pride of the Ironborn. Today, the Iron Islands are nominally subservient to the Iron Throne, but the spirit of Corey, the raider, dwells in the heart of every captain. Euron saw the old Maester's hand tremble on the Targaryen sigil. Maester Clegane was born and raised in the Iron Islands, and even after more than a decade of Maester life in the Citadel, the story of the Iron Islands had always flowed in his blood, and he had never forgotten it. Maester Clegane displayed the map before Euron and asked, "Euron, do you know where you are?" "This is Pike Place, the home of House Greyjoy." Euron's voice was clear, yet carried a strange certainty. Clegane raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Very accurate, sir. Your father will be proud of you." Euron didn't respond. His gaze swept over the other islands, Great Wake Island, Old Wake Island, Harlow Island. Each name evoked memories of the original story in his mind. He knew which families were based on these islands, and he knew how they would choose their sides in the future. "Sir," Euron suddenly asked, "why do the Ironborn call themselves Irons?" Clegane stroked his beard, a habit he had when deep in thought. "It's an ancient tradition, sir. Our ancestors believed that the drowned god forged the Ironborn from iron, the Andals from soft gold, and the other races from mud." Euron nodded, but in his mind he recalled his knowledge of modern metallurgy. Iron was indeed harder than bronze, but it rusted easily. The analogy was surprisingly accurate. "The Ironborn live differently from other kingdoms," Clegane continued. "We pay with iron coins, not gold or silver." "Iron coins. Pay with swords and axes, sir. We take what we want." Clegane's voice carried pride. "That's the old way. The ancient road is simply another way of saying plunder and looting. In the culture of the Ironborn, warriors plunder spoils from defeated enemies, paying with iron coins, rather than using currency, money, to buy goods. The Ironborn slave laborers and salt merchants also obtain their wealth through plunder, never through buying and selling. Using money to buy goods is considered shameful by the Ironborn. Nothing is more desirable than what is stolen and free." Euron's lips curled slightly upward. He remembered the disaster caused by King Balon's attempt to revive the ancient road in the original story, and he also remembered Euron's even more extreme actions in the original work. Father wants to change these things, Euron suddenly said. Clygon's expression visibly stiffened. Lord Corran does indeed have some innovative ideas. Euron knows his father, Corran Greyjoy, is trying to integrate the Iron Islands into the mainstream culture of the Seven Kingdoms. In the original story, this attempt failed, leading to a temporary decline in the Greyjoy family's power. But now, with his intervention, history might take a different turn. 3 years passed, filled with confusion and bewilderment, but ultimately Huang Zhengdao chose to accept his current identity and the reality of having transmigrated to the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. Tell me about the sigil and motto of the other families, Meister Clegane. Euron changed the subject. Clygon breathed a sigh of relief and began pointing to the map, explaining, besides our Greyjoy family ruling Pike Isle, Great Wick Isle is controlled by the Drow Drum family, whose sigil is a bone and a chain. Euron listened intently, comparing every detail with the information in his memory. The Drum family would support Baron in the future. The Stonetree family's sigil was a rock in the tentacle of a sea monster. The Merlin family's motto was, though dead, won lives. Some of these families would be loyal to Greyjoy, while others would betray him at crucial moments. Chapter 3: Knowledge is Power. Euron, a booming voice came from outside the door. Corran Greyjoy strode into the room, the scent of the sea breeze wafting in with him. He was tall, his black hair now streaked with silver, and the scars on his face told tales of countless naval battles. Father, Euron slid off the chair and gave a slightly awkward bow. Corran laughed and picked up his son. What did my little sea monster learn today? The situation of the various families, father, Euron replied, then unexpectedly added, and your desire to abolish the ancient road. Corran's smile froze. He looked sternly at Maester Clegane, who quickly shook his head to indicate that he hadn't told the boy. How do you know this, son? Corran put Euron back on the ground and squatted down to look him in the eye. Euron blinked, feigning innocence. I heard you arguing with Brother Baron, stopping him from going out to sea to plunder. You said the ancient road made the Iron Islands poor. Corran's expression became complicated. He patted Euron's head. You're still too young to understand these things. The ancient path was our ancestors' way of life. Changing it isn't easy. It's more than just difficult. Developing a good habit is hard, but changing a habit that has been upheld for hundreds or thousands of years is as difficult as ascending to heaven. Euron knew the predicament his father faced. The Iron Islands were barren and rocky, producing almost nothing but fish and seaweed. The Ironborn lived by raiding, but this way of life became increasingly unsustainable after the Targaryen dynasty unified Westeros. Father, Euron suddenly said, if the Ironborn don't plunder, how will we live? Corran was astonished by his son's insight. Trade, son. Barter our iron ore and salt water for food, and build merchant ships instead of longships. But will the other families agree? Corran gave a wry smile. That's precisely the problem. Your brother Baron is strongly opposed. Euron recalled the stubborn Balon Greyjoy from the original story, the inflexible figure who caused the Iron Islands 2 rebellions to fail. Balon was only 15, but his character was already evident. More troublesome was that Balon Greyjoy was the eldest son, destined to inherit his father Corran's title and rule. With father and son holding opposing ideologies, how could they possibly persuade the other lords? I support you, father, Euron said earnestly. Corran didn't seem to care, but still laughed heartily, lifting his son high in the air. You're only 3 years old and you already have political views. My little sea monster will definitely grow up to be an outstanding lord. After Corran left, Euron returned to the window. In the distance, on the horizon, a longship was entering the harbour, its sails adorned with the golden sea monster of House Greyjoy. He knew it was a ship his father had sent to Lannisport for trade, laden with iron ore and saltwater fish. "Young master," Clygon said softly, "do you truly understand what your father wants to do?" Euron turned around, his dark blue eyes unusually bright in the dim room. "I understand better than anyone, Maester. The Iron Islands must change, or they will be swept away by history." Clygon gasped. It was chilling to hear such words coming from a 3-year-old child. The days that followed were repetitive and uneventful, but Euron's learning progress was astonishingly rapid. He not only mastered the information about the various families of the Iron Islands, but also began to learn basic navigation and weapon handling. Coron was amazed by his youngest son's talent and specially made him a small wooden sword. Every afternoon, Euron would appear on time at the training ground, paved with white sea salt, to receive training from the soldiers. "Hold on tighter, Euron," Uncle Balf gruffly instructed at the training grounds of Pike City. This burly man, who would one day become the commander-in-chief of the Iron Fleet, was still a young man in his early 20s, his muscles as solid as ship cables. "Hold your Ironborn sword as tightly as you would hold a lover's waist." He seemed to have forgotten that he was only teaching a 3-year-old child who had no idea what a lover was or how to hold a lover's waist. Euron gripped the wooden sword with both hands, assuming a defensive stance. Balf Greyjoy laughed as he swung the wooden sword at Euron, who barely managed to block it, but was knocked to the ground by the impact. "Not bad," Balf pulled him up, patted Euron's sea salt-covered bottom with his wooden sword, and said, "Much better than Baron was at 3 years old." Euron slapped his Uncle Balf's hand away, gripped the wooden sword tightly, and said resolutely, "Again. This world has never been peaceful. There are wars between humans, wars in the game of power, and wars against the White Walkers in the future. To survive, one must learn how to use a sword and shield to protect oneself." After training, Euron went alone to the castle's library. Pike Castle didn't have many books. Most were nautical logs and war records. He stood on tiptoe and pulled a tattered copy of the Book of Kings of Westeros from the shelf. "Young master, you can already read," Clergan's surprised voice came from behind. Euron didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the page, pointed to the text, and read aloud. "Seahorse Corlys Valyrian, Lord of the Tides, during the Dance of the Blood Dragons." Clygon's beard trembled. "Gods above, you are a prodigy, sir." Euron smiled wryly to himself. With his adult memories, he could naturally read, but he had to control his pace to avoid arousing too much suspicion. He pretended to struggle as he read, occasionally asking Clygon about the pronunciation of certain words. As the sun set, Euron was summoned to the family hall for a meal. Coron sat at the head of the table, next to his mother, Lady Sansa, a thin woman from Blackcrown City. His brother Balon and Uncle Balf sat on either side of the long table. "I heard you've improved again today, Euron," Corin said with a smile, cutting the salted fish on his plate. Baron scoffed. "What's the use of studying? True Ironborn should learn to sail longships and wield battle axes." Corin frowned. "Baron, I've said it countless times. Times are changing." Euron's attitude towards learning is commendable. Baron's 15-year-old face was filled with defiance. Euron observed this future King Baron, noticing the stubbornness in his eyes. In the original story, it was Baron's obstinacy that led to the Iron Islands' 2 failed rebellions, ultimately resulting in the destruction of his family. "Brother," Euron suddenly said, "reading can help us fight better." Baron scoffed. "How can I help?" "By understanding the enemy's history and culture," Euron answered calmly. "Knowing that the Redwynes of Greentree Island are fond of poisoning their wine can prevent us from being ambushed. Understanding the Lannisters' pride can be used to set traps. Understanding the maxims and banners of various houses reveals their ways of life. Familiarity with the lifestyles and fighting styles of people in different regions is essential to defeating them. There's an old Eastern saying, "Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated." The hall suddenly fell silent. Everyone stared at the 3-year-old child, unable to believe that these words had come from him. The ancient Eastern proverb in particular was very insightful, yet they had never heard it before, leaving them utterly astonished. Corran, who had been eating with his head down and hunched over, was the first to snap out of his daze upon hearing his second son Euron's words. He burst into laughter, slamming his hand on the table. "Well said. My son will surely become the most intelligent lord of the Iron Islands." The burden of reform weighed heavily on his back. He had proposed abolishing slavery, opening trading ports, and even allowing the Seven Gods monks to land on the islands, all to drag the Iron Islands out of the blood-stained quagmire of the ancient road. But his eldest son, Baron, had consistently opposed his reforms, filling Corran with a frustrated anger. He turned and sternly shouted, "Learn to think with a pen, not an axe. The Ironborn need a new anchor. Learn from your brother, read more books, and stop playing finger games with those filthy sailors." Baron's face darkened. He stabbed fiercely at the food on his plate, falling silent. A new anchor. A new anchor. Or perhaps a new successor. Stubborn Baron knew that his differing beliefs with his father had caused many conflicts and arguments, but he would never compromise because of it, not even if his father used the successor's position as a threat. He glanced at his composed younger brother, Euron, his eyes filled with disdain, a brat who only knew how to flatter their father. After dinner, Euron was allowed some free time within the castle grounds. He longed to go to the seaside, but was not permitted. He leaned against the window, gazing at the distant, turbulent sea at sunset. The sea breeze, carrying a salty smell, ruffled his curly hair, and the roar of the waves crashing against the rocks filled his ears. He seemed to have inadvertently offended his hot-tempered brother again in the dining room, but Euron didn't dwell on it. He knew that in the future, the brothers would have even greater conflicts due to their differing beliefs. The struggle between reformers and conservatives is inevitable. He recalled Euron's madness in the original work, controlling dragons with the dragon horn, drinking the nightshade water to gain precognitive abilities, and possibly even performing blood magic rituals. Those methods, while effective, came at too high a price. Now, with modern knowledge and historical foresight, perhaps a wiser path could be found. "Young master." "It's time to sleep," came the maid's voice from afar. Euron took one last look at the dark sea before turning and heading back to the castle. He knew he had to consciously cultivate his own power, forge relationships with key figures for the future, and prepare for change in the Iron Islands. A 3-year-old body housing an adult soul. This is both an advantage and a curse. He must carefully conceal his abnormality while seizing every opportunity to learn and grow. Behind the stone walls of Pike, the Game of Thrones has begun, and he, Euron Greyjoy, will no longer be the mad Raven-Eye from the original stories, but a completely new being, a ruler who blends modern wisdom with the Ironborn's ambition. Back in his bedroom, Euron knelt by the bed, and like all the Iron Island's children, offered a brief prayer to the drowning god. "Drowning god," Euron murmured, "if you truly exist, grant me the power to change the fate of the Iron Islands." Then he climbed into bed, closed his eyes, and began planning tomorrow's lessons. Basic navigation, the distribution of resources on the Iron Islands, the marriage alliances between the various families. Chapter 4, 1 Peace System. 2 more years passed uneventfully on Pike Island. In 275 AC, Euron Greyjoy was 5 years old. Dawn was shrouded in a salty mist, and the damp sea breeze whipped salt crystals against the rocks. Euron Greyjoy walked barefoot across the slippery rocks, the icy seawater washing over his ankles before receding, leaving behind a layer of fine foam. In the distance, the black silhouette of the drinking ship loomed in and out of the mist. The longship had a shallow draft, its prow carved with an open dragon's mouth and 6 brass-rimmed oars on each side. This was the 3rd time he had secretly come to see the ship. Ever since the cracked gauntlet, Dagmor stopped at Pike Isle for supplies last month, Baron Greyje's eyes have never left it. Since then, Baron has spent almost every day with Dagmor and his crew, drinking, boasting, and sharpening axes. Baron has been wanting to go out to sea and plunder for a long time, and the drinking spree has given him the opportunity. The gentleman does not stand under the wall. If he could, Euron would much rather stay in the safety of the castle. But 3 days ago, when he first stepped barefoot into the sea, he heard a sound that made his heart race. Ding! Host contact with seawater detected. 1 P system activation, rate 1%. Thank God, I finally have a cheat code. The tide surged in, washing over his ankles, its coldness carrying a strange intimacy. Euron suddenly saw an octopus retreating into a crevice in the rocks, 3 inches below the surface, not with his eyes, but through the vibrations of the water. He tentatively ventured into deeper waters, but was pulled back by the guards behind him as soon as the water reached his knees. The 1 P system activation rate is 1.01%. The 1 P system will officially unlock when the activation rate reaches 100%. A long voyage might just be the key to fully activating the system. Euron stared at the drinker, his fingers unconsciously stirring the seawater. To change one's fate, whether it be his own, his father's, his brother's, his unborn nephews and nieces, or even the entire Iron Islands, one needs power. And the drinker had just given him that opportunity. Young master shouldn't have come to a place like this. When those sailors get drunk, they won't respect you, let alone the young master. They wouldn't even respect the king or the king himself. Old Fisherman Wick stood on the shore, blocking Euron's view with his hand, which was missing 2 fingers. If your father knew you sneaked onto the ship last night. If you don't tell, and I don't tell, my father will naturally never know. 5-year-old Euron was allowed to move around outside the castle with guards, but only on a small stretch of coastline. Coron trusted the old fisherman Wick's loyalty, bravery, and fighting ability, and temporarily appointed him as Euron's guard. Suddenly, a sliver of sea fog was blown away by the wind. Euron saw a towering figure standing beside the helm at the stern. Dagmor's jaw was split in 2, hence his nickname, the Cleft Chin, held together by iron rings, from which dark red wine would leak each time he drank. Legend had it that he had single-handedly killed 7 Mersailers on the Stepstone Islands, and the gold-threaded belt he had stolen was now fastened over his greasy leather armor. Euron pointed to a long string of things hanging from the mast and asked, "What's that?" The old fisherman Wick gurgled in his throat. "Ears. Those that haven't dried yet are the ears of the Rise merchants. The drinking spree just hijacked a merchant ship a few days ago. Each ear represents a successful plunder." His tone was tinged with envy, as if the instinct for plunder in his blood had been ignited. Euron pulled a silver deer from his pocket and tossed it to old Wick. "I forgot to congratulate you. Your youngest son is 3 months old now, right? Spend more time with him. He'll grow up quickly and won't be so cute anymore." The old fisherman caught the silver coin steadily, chuckled, and understood the meaning behind Euron's words, to dissuade him from his idea of plundering at sea. He nodded. "Young master is right. At old age, old Wick is only suited to fishing in Ironman's Bay." Is the young prince inspecting his fleet again? Dagmor's voice was rougher than the waves, but it carried a tender tone. He crouched by the rocks, the crack in his chin held in place by an iron ring still stained with last night's mead. He lifted Euron up like a kitten, his large hand, missing 3 fingers, surprisingly gentle. Your brother's going to do something stupid. Dagmor wiped Euron's wet hands with his leather armor. But I suspect the little sea monster already found out. The damp wooden planks suddenly creaked. Baron emerged from behind the pile of goods. The 18-year-old was more robust than most of the soldiers, his leather vest stained with the beer and women's cosmetics left from the previous night's revelry. A newly sharpened axe was tucked into his belt, its blade gleaming bluish-grey in the morning mist. "Are you spying on me, you little mouse?" Baron grabbed Euron by the collar, his breath smelling of sea salt on Euron's face. "Trying to betray your dear brother." Euron's feet dangled in the air as he saw the new scar on Balon's neck, a mark inflicted 3 days earlier by King Coron's whip, when his father roared that the eldest son of Greyjoy shouldn't be acting like an ordinary pirate. Euron blinked. "The eastern reef will be submerged by the high tide tonight," he pointed to the drinker. "With the southwest wind, we can sail out of father's sights before dawn." Baron's blue eyes narrowed to slits. In the distance, the bugle call for the crew to assemble could be heard, and the Hao Yin was retracting its gangplank. "Brother," Baron's voice was like a taut sail, "if you tell father." His hand rested on the axe handle, but his eyes darted around like a child caught doing something wrong. A wise man knows how to shut up. He tossed Euron onto the wet sand like a fish, and without turning back, warned as he strode toward the longship, "If mother asks, say I went to Old Wick Island to duel the stone trees." "Mother won't believe it." Euron stood up, brushed the sand off his bottom, and snorted, "Even a 3-year-old knows what you're going to do with Dagmo." Baron whirled around, his eyes fierce. "You little bastard, believe me or not, I'll tie you to the rocks and let you experience drowning again." Euron grinned. "I might not report you unless I get to sail with the Grandeur." Old Fisherman Wick stared in disbelief. "Out to sea." Baron laughed loudly. "Go out to sea. You think we're going fishing. They're not fishing, they're plundering merchant ships. You're only 5 years old." "Even at 5 years old, I am an Ironblood, the son of Corran Greyjoy, the young lord of the Iron Islands." Baron gritted his teeth in anger. Swords have no eyes, and blood and flesh fly everywhere. "Do you think looting is child's play? The old Meister and his pile of mouldy sheepskins are waiting for you in the tower. Don't you always say that studying is useless, and that true Ironborn should learn to sail longships and wield battle-axes?" Euron looked at him provocatively. "Or do you want your 5-year-old brother to charge ahead? Or is it that Baron Greyjoy, the self-proclaimed first swordsman of the Iron Islands, can't even protect his own brother?" Baron's face flushed red. He grabbed Euron by the collar, his missing front tooth contorting into a sinister grin in the morning light. "Since you're not afraid of death, then I'll show you the true ancient path." Old Fisherman Wick stood in front of Baron, his large, muscular hand gripping the axe handle, his eyes sharp as he said, "Put the young master down." Baron put Euron down, grinned at Wick, and drew his longsword. "Old man, all you care about is the young master. I'm the future king of the Iron Islands, you old codger. What, want to test the sharpness of my sword? This is my own idea, and it has nothing to do with you." Euron waved at the old Fisherman Wick and laughed loudly. "Wick, go back and tell my father that I will return with a ship full of spoils in half a month to a month." Seeing that he couldn't stop him, the old Fisherman Wick leaped onto the boat, his face ashen. "I'm your guard. You went out to sea recklessly. How can I face the king? Even if the king doesn't kill me, I have no face to do so." The sails of the drinker rose, the black sails bearing the emblem of House Dagmor, a sea serpent biting its own tail. As the last mooring line was untied, a small flag suddenly flew from the masthead. The golden sea monster of Greyjoy coiled menacingly in the morning light. Euron's lips curled into a slight smile. System activation level 1.5%. Chapter 5 Voyages and Plunder. Coron Greyjoy had 3 sons, born to his first wife, Muriel of House Stonetrace on Harlow Island. Harren Greyjoy, his first son, died in infancy from grayscale. Quinton Greyjoy, his second son, died in infancy. Donald Greyjoy, his third son, was born and returned to the embrace of the drowned god along with his wife. Later, Coron had his second wife, the Rock Wife, who was also the mother of Beren and Euron. Because of the deaths of his 3 previous children, Coron cherished and valued his 2 sons, whom he had finally had. 18-year-old Balon was incredibly strong, defeating many experienced and ruthless pirates in finger dance duels, and capable of holding his own against his uncle Balf Greyjoy, now hailed as the first knight of the Iron Islands in longsword combat. 5-year-old Euron, on the other hand, was the center of attention from birth. His heterochromatic eyes, resurrection, and reputation as the son of the drowning god spread throughout the Iron Islands, and his intelligence and resilience astonished those who came into contact with him. One is a warrior, the other a scholar. They represent the future and hope of the Iron Islands. But now, the 2 beloved sons of the Iron Islands kings are both on his drinking spree, ready to accompany him to the Stone Steps Islands to plunder merchant ships. Dagmo felt immense pressure, and the thrill of plundering suddenly diminished considerably. But the sails were already hoisted, and they could only move forward, never to return unless they were laden with spoils of war or their own corpses. Before dawn, the Pike Place docks were shrouded in a salty mist. The damp planks sank slightly underfoot, seeping black seawater, like a drowning god licking the ships about to set sail. Euron Greyjoy walked barefoot across the piles of ropes, the fine sand and shells digging into his soles. The icy seawater washed over his ankles, then receded, leaving behind a layer of fine foam. The black silhouette of the drinking spree loomed in and out of the morning mist, its low-slung gunnels like a lurking sea beast, the dragon carved on its prow with its mouth wide open, as if ready to devour its distant prey at any moment. "Remember, little sea monster." Dagmor ruffled Euron's curly hair with his calloused hand, his split chin gleaming coldly in the morning light. His voice was like a rock weathered by the sea breeze, rough yet carrying a strange rhythm. The sound of the waves speaks. A gentle murmur means safety, a hiss means shallows, but if you hear a thud— The old pirate made a sinking gesture, a gurgling laugh escaping his throat. "That's the rocks gnawing at your hull, the drowning god knocking on your coffin lid." Euron nodded, his heterochromatic eyes sweeping across the deck, his left eye like an abyss swallowing light, his right eye as cold as the sea before a storm. A 5-year-old body housed the soul of a transmigrator, but now he had to learn like a true Iron citizen. He reached out and touched the hull. The rough planks left tiny splinters in his palm, carrying the salty taste of seawater. The sea breeze suddenly picked up, carrying a salty, pungent odor. Baron Greyjoy stood motionless beside the helm, like a bronze statue, his 18-year-old muscles taut beneath his leather armor, his gaze fixed on the gradually whitening horizon. The scars from his father Coron's whippings still lingered on his neck, dark red scabs like a writhing sea serpent, but at this moment his mind was entirely focused on the distant raids. Dagmor was holding a voyage ceremony in front of the figurehead. The old pirate smeared whale oil on the eyes of the wooden sea monster, his hoarse voice carried on the sea breeze. "Open your eyes, old buddy, and lead us to a fat prey." 53 sailors took their positions, and Baron stood beside the helm like a bronze statue. "Raise the sails." Dagmo's roar drowned out the seagull's screams. Black sails billowed, and a banner emblazoned with a sea serpent biting its tail fluttered at the masthead. Euron gripped the gangland tightly, feeling the longship's awakening tremor, the creaking of the keel, the hum of the taut ropes, the muffled crashing of waves against the hull. These sounds wove together in his ears, a war song of iron and steel. Salty spray splashed onto his face, carrying a strange vitality. Ding. 1 P-system activation, rate 2.5%. On the third day of the voyage, Euron was caught red-handed by Dagmo while he was lying on the forecourt, observing the angle of the sun. Hi. Our little prince is studying navigation. The old pirate lifted him up to the ship's wheel like a kitten, his eyes gleaming with a mocking light. Look closely, this is the real Iron Man's compass. Dagmor loosened his belt and urinated into the sea. A forked stream of urine against the wind means there's an undercurrent, while a straight stream with the wind is a good sign. He glanced at Euron, grinned, and said, "Never mind, you can learn that when you're older." Euron didn't laugh. He pointed to a wooden crate in the corner of the deck. "There's an astrolabe in there." Dagmor raised an eyebrow. "A Meister's toy." "The Ironborn have no use for that stuff." He patted the dagger at his waist. "We rely on this for navigation, the instinct of blood and salt." But Euron knew that true seafaring was much more than that. The nautical charts near the Stepstone Islands are the Ironborn's secret. Dagmor pulled a whalebone from his leather armor, covered in symbols marking whirlpools, reefs, and pirate lairs. The bone was polished smooth by countless handling, its edges rounded, clearly the result of numerous examinations. "We're almost there." He pointed to a jagged mark on the bone fragment with his missing finger. "The Weeping Widow whirlpool, which swallowed 20 ships. Sprinkle salt on the deck as you pass through, or the drowning god will take away your helmsman." Euron silently noted it down. As for sprinkling salt on the deck, regardless of whether it actually worked, respecting tradition was fine. Salt wasn't worth much anyway. Dagmor was experienced, both in navigation and plunder. The nautical knowledge he imparted wasn't found in books, but for someone who wanted to control the seas, this knowledge was more precious than gold. As the voyage began, the drinking spree continued to venture into the depths of the ocean, heading towards the Stone Steps Islands, and the Pirate King system's activation level gradually increased. Ding. Pirate King system activation level 20.5%. On the 7th day of the voyage, Euron witnessed the wrath of the sea. The Havoc is a typical Ironman longship, with a low hull suitable for surprise attacks and a shallow draft that allows it to run aground on beaches. Its sails are black sails coated with tar, which are lighter and faster than the sails of merchant ships on Green Pavilion Island. But when encountering headwinds, the Ironman will furl the sails and rely entirely on oars. 6 oar positions on each side, rotated by the strongest pirates. "Look at the clouds." Baron suddenly appeared behind Euron, pointing to the swirling, fish-scale-like clouds on the horizon. "Those are the teeth of the drowned god. A storm is coming." At first, it was just a leaden grey on the horizon, but soon the dark clouds pounded the sea like warhammers. Huge waves rose like walls, and the drinking ship was tossed to the crest of a wave like a leaf, only to be slammed into the trough. Euron was thrown to port and rolled to starboard, his fingernails digging into the cracks in the planks to keep him from being swept overboard. Even with thorough preparations, the raging sea is still beyond human control. Flatten the sails. Secure the cargo boxes. Dagmor tied himself to the helm with ropes, rainwater seeping in from his cracked chin and spitting out with his saliva. "Baron, get your brother in the hold." Baron grabbed Euron like a sack of potatoes and rushed into the captain's cabin. In the dim light of the whale oil lamp, the nautical chart was soaked with seawater, the ink blurred into a hazy blue-black. Baron, however, pointed precisely to a spot. "Remember this location, Devil's Molar, the most dangerous whirlpool area in the Steppes Islands. If the ship breaks apart, swim northeast. There are reefs there you can climb." Euron stared at his brother's rain-soaked face. At that moment, Baron didn't seem like a brute, but rather like a true captain. A deafening crash of snapping masts echoed outside the cabin. Dagmore's curses pierced the wooden planks. Damn the seven. Old Wick's fallen into the sea. Euron suddenly broke free from Baron, grabbed the dagger on the table, and slashed his palm, smearing the blood on the doorframe. An ancient ritual he had heard from the old fisherman Wick, a blood sacrifice offered to the drowning god. The blood flowed down the doorframe, seeping into the cracks in the wooden planks, as if absorbed by some unseen force. Ding! The host has actively participated in the maritime crisis for the first time. The activation level of the One Piece system has increased by 5%, currently at 65%. A warm current flowed into his limbs. Baron stared intently at his brother, about to grab him back, when a giant wave blasted him back into the captain's cabin. His fingers, pale and bluish, gripped the door crack as he screamed wildly, "Damn it, get back here right now." But his voice was drowned out by the howling wind and roaring waves, and then he witnessed a miraculous scene. When Euron climbed back onto the deck, he was able to walk on the tilting ship as if it were flat ground, and he could even predict the direction of each wave. Euron picked up a rope from the deck and threw it to the port rower struggling in the giant waves. The rope, as if alive, precisely wrapped around Old Wick's wrist as he tumbled in the waves. Once he was sure the rower had gripped the rope, Euron tied the other end to a nail on the deck. No matter how big the waves or how fierce the wind, Euron remained unaffected, as if the sea were an extension of his own body. Dagmo lay sprawled on the deck, his eyes wide. By the god of drowning! Does this little sea monster live on the ship? The son of the drowning god. Everyone unconsciously recalled the legend related to Euron. Chapter 6: Life at Sea and First Aid. 10 days into the voyage, after the storm. The deck of the Hungry Drinker was piled high with bulging wooden barrels, each tightly bound with thick hemp rope to prevent them from rolling off during the voyage. Most conspicuous were the barrels of salted cod. Salt crystals seeped from the gaps in the dark wooden planks, and when the lids were lifted, a stench of rotting seaweed and dead fish assaulted the senses. When Euron first saw the sailors opening the barrels, he thought it was some kind of punishment ritual, a biological bomb, or something to stink the enemy to death. "Watch closely, little prince," red-haired Oakwood grinned, his missing front tooth reeking of alcohol. He pried open the bucket lid with a dagger, revealing a layer of milky white maggots floating on the surface of the brownish-yellow brine, wriggling on the salted fish carcasses like a layer of living mold. Old One-Eyed Wolf was unfazed. His rough fingers picked up a dried cod, maggots falling off with a rustling sound. He wiped it casually on his filthy apron, then popped it into his mouth and chewed, yellow juice oozing from the corner of his mouth. "The more you chew, the better it tastes," he muttered, revealing his uneven black teeth. "Sea salt is good for you." Euron's stomach churned. But as he hesitated, Dagmo's iron hook had already speared a piece of fish and offered it to him. "Eat," the old pirate's one eye narrowed, "unless you want to be as hungry as Torek, gnawing on your own leather armor." Euron finally shook his head slightly in refusal. Hard bread is another kind of torture. The dark, round cakes were locked in an iron box to keep out rats and dampness. When the old, lame cook brought out a box, they were as hard as rocks, covered with suspicious green spots. "Catch!" Oakwood swung his axe and brought it down hard. With a bang, the bread split in two, and crumbs flew everywhere. Euron picked up a piece and found that the inside was crawling with tiny beetles, which were frantically scurrying away through the honeycomb-like holes in the bread. Baron grinned, grabbed half a beetle, and stuffed it into his mouth. The crisp sound of his teeth crushing the beetle was clearly audible. "Fresher than fish." "That makes sense. It does look a little better than fish." Euron followed their example, taking a cracked loaf of bread from the iron box, scraping off the mold with his dagger, and then dipping it in seawater to soften it. With his first bite, his tongue tasted wood and grit. The bread was mixed with sawdust and shredded seashells to extend its shelf life. Fresh water was even more precious than food. Tar-coated sheepskin bags hung in the shadow of the mast, each drop meticulously rationed. When Euron drank, he noticed tiny, transparent creatures floating on the surface, swimming within the bags like wisps of living mist. The most terrifying thing was the fresh water after the 7th day. The water in the sheepskin bags began to turn green, tasting like a mixture of rust and rotting seaweed. Don't stare at it, and don't waste a drop. Every drop of fresh water is precious, Dagmor warned him, handing him a rusty iron strainer. Just filter it out. It'll be fine if you drink it anyway. Your intestines will be full of sea worms sooner or later. Euron didn't follow the old pirate's advice to drink the water. Instead, he filtered it and boiled it on the stove before drinking it. This action earned him a severe scolding from his brother Baron. For the sailors of the Great Drinker, the most painful thing was that their liquor was almost gone. There should have been enough for at least a month, but in the great storm a day ago, half the liquor was taken by the drowned god, and the remaining liquor had to be strictly rationed. For the sailors, liquor held the same importance as their swords and their heads. The cargo hold after sunset became the Iron Men's arena. 20 sailors huddled among barrels of salted fish and piles of ropes, the stench of sweat and fish rising in murky heat. "Come on. Let the little prince see." Old Wick pushed Euron to the center of the circle. His opponent was one-eyed Glenn, his face still smeared with the blood from the day's battle. He was unarmed, his hands coated in a sticky layer of whale oil, which gleamed slickly in the dim light of the whale oil lamp. The first rule of the Ironborn in a fight, he suddenly stepped forward, his whale-all-covered hands grabbing Euron's face, make the enemy lose his footing. Euron dodged to the side, but his foot got caught on Glenn's boot. Just as he was about to fall, he grabbed the rope above his head and swung up, his legs wrapping around Glenn's neck like scissors. The two crashed heavily onto the deck, making the cargo barrels hum. Beautiful, Dagmor took a swig of rum. But this is how it should be in a real fight. He suddenly kicked over a barrel, splashing the amber liquid all over Euron. In the instant Euron's vision blurred, the old pirate's knee was already pressed against his lower back, a rough dagger against his throat. Dead men don't get a chance to swing on ropes. The bloody training continued late into the night. The Iron Clan's combat philosophy could be summed up in 2 words: practicality. They learned to bite open an enemy's trachea with their teeth, to gouge out eyes with their fingernails, and even how to conceal sharpened fish bones in their sleeves. Elegance is bullshit on land. At sea, survival is the only truth. Besides eating, sleeping, bragging, fighting, drinking, there's not enough alcohol to drink to one's heart's content, and staring blankly at the sea during the voyage, there is another very dangerous activity: finger dancing. Finger dance is a popular game among the Ironborn of the Iron Islands, requiring at least 2 players. Participants throw short axes at each other, and the one hit must catch or dodge the spinning axe without moving an inch. The game is called finger dance because it usually ends when a participant loses at least 1 finger. Balon Greyjoy is a fanatic of the game, especially after hearing the legend that Horace Hall defeated Logger Grey on Ii in a finger dance duel, thus inheriting the title of King of the Iron Islands. However, Horace Hall also lost 2 fingers in the duel, becoming known as Lame Horse. This legend turned Balon's love for finger dance into a fanaticism. Euron thought it wasn't a game at all, but rather tantamount to stupid self-harm. But 5-year-old Euron didn't yet have the ability to change the Iron People's habits, so he could only be an observer. The sharkskin war drums pounded on the deck, each beat like a blow to the ribs. "Let the drowning gods bear witness to the hero," Dagmo roared, slamming down his drumsticks. The sharkskin war drum reverberated, making everyone's eardrums ache. The sailors drew a circle 5 paces in diameter with whale oil, and Baron Grage and Crackfinger Hawk stood facing each other, their throwing axes gleaming like mercury in the moonlight. When Dagmo's drumsticks struck for the 3rd time, the duel suddenly erupted. Baron pulled his right arm back like a catapult, and in the instant his waist twisted, the short-handled axe transformed into a horizontal silver arc, shooting straight at Hawk's heart. Euron clearly caught the airflow torn apart as the axe blade spun. This was not a game, but a deadly strike aimed at a vital point. Hawk's one-armed body displayed astonishing resilience. He spun rapidly on his left foot, the axe blade grazing his leather breastplate and sending sparks flying. Almost simultaneously, his remaining left hand drew the throwing axe from his waist, and using the momentum of the spin, hurled it back with tremendous force. The axe emitted a shrill, ghostly shriek as it aimed straight for Baron's throat. Clang! Baron parried with his axe, the 2 blades colliding and sparks flying. The immense impact forced him back half a step, his boot heel landing on the edge of the grease trappings. "Back off." "The sea," the Ironborn roared. Dagmo grinned as he lifted the salt bucket and splashed the murky liquid all over Baron's head. The salt water seeped into the unhealed whip wound on the side of his neck, causing a spasm. Baron wiped the salt from his face, his eyes flashing with ferocity. Both axes flew from his hands simultaneously. One swept low across Hawk's ankle, the other spun high to block his retreat. A deadly pincer attack. Hawk roared and leaped into the air, his high-spinning axe scraping the sole of his boot. But the instant he landed, his low, sweeping axe had already cleaved into his calf muscle. The cracking sound of bone breaking sent shivers down Euron's spine. Hawk, however, used the momentum of his kneeling to bite the axe handle and throw it back with all his might. The blood-stained axe spun into a crimson wheel. Baron jerked his head to the side, the axe blade severing half an inch of his black hair above his left ear and embedding itself deeply into the mast behind him. Amidst the flying sawdust, Hawk, dragging his injured leg with exposed bone, miraculously rose again. "A blood vessel is severed." Euron rushed into the fray, pointing to Hawk's calf. Blood gushing from the wound had already fanned out 3 meters away. A ruptured femoral artery. He'll die if the bleeding doesn't stop within 3 minutes. Dagmo's drumsticks hung suspended in midair. Baron, panting heavily, glared at his brother, the throwing axe humming in his hand. "You're going to die in his place." Old Wick stood in front of Euron, never forgetting his role as a guard, even after boarding the ship. "I must preserve the fighting strength of the drinking hell." Euron kicked away the blood-stained axe, slamming the nautical chart into the pool of blood. "There are Bravo's clippers to the northeast. If we lose men now, they'll be hunting us down tomorrow morning." "Ironblood's courage," Baron's voice was icy, "is more important than life itself." "Useless injury is not courage." Euron stepped forward, his heterochromatic eyes eerily striking in the moonlight. "It's foolishness." He swiftly drew his sword, severing the cable, and the heavy anchor crashed into the circle of death. "Want to play? Why not tie your feet together and jump on the anchor tip? Only those who survive deserve to be called warriors." A deathly silence enveloped the deck. Dagmor suddenly burst into maniacal laughter, smashing a barrel of wine. "Did you hear that, you fools? Play like this next time." He didn't want to see the 2 brothers arguing on his ship, so he used a joke to deflect the small conflict. Play your sister," Euron thought to himself. By the moonlight, he saw the horrific wound on Hawk's calf. The axe blade had split open the fibula, The dark red muscle rolled up like a split pomegranate, and deep inside, pulsating bluish-purple blood vessels were faintly visible. "Press here," Euron roared, grabbing Old Wick's hand and pressing his thumb firmly against Hawk's groin. That was the pressure point on the femoral artery. Modern first aid knowledge became a lifesaver. The gushing blood flow abruptly decreased, changing from a spurt to a gush. "Get the liquor." Needle and thread. Canvas rope. Euron's childish voice carried an undeniable air of authority. Dagmor paused for a moment, then kicked open the wooden crate and pulled out a half-empty bottle of rum. Baron silently cut off a section of canvas rope. The rough hemp fibers were soaked with blood. Euron bit off the cork of the bottle, pouring the amber liquid onto the wound. Ugh! Hawk awoke in excruciating pain, and then fainted again. With the alcohol washing over him, Euron could see the severed blood vessel. The main branch of the femoral artery had been sliced open by a third of its length by an axe blade, gushing blood like a ruptured water sack. Bone fragments and wood chips were embedded in the muscle, trembling slightly with the pulse. "Give me the shark teeth," Euron reached out. Glenn hurriedly unfastened his necklace, an iron-born amulet made of 6 shark teeth. Euron picked out the longest, sharpest tooth, dipped it in rum, and threaded it through the twisted rope stitch. As he pierced the rolled-up flesh with the shark teeth, the onlookers gasped. The needle tip precisely avoided the nerve bundles, weaving along both sides of the severed blood vessel wall. With each tightening of the rope, the ruptured blood vessel closed a little more. Euron tore the canvas rope that Baron handed him into strips. He first laid down rum-soaked burlap, then spiraled the strips around. When he reached the third layer, he suddenly shoved Hawk's dagger between the wounded man's teeth. "Bite down." Then he grabbed both ends of the strips and tightened them with all his might. Crack. A sickening grinding sound came from the fractured bone. Hawk's eyes bulged, and deep teeth marks were visible on the hilt of his dagger. But even more horrifying was the crimson stain of blood that instantly soaked through the bandages. Euron didn't hesitate to add a second and third layer of pressure bandages. When the 7th layer of bandages was tightly wrapped, the bleeding finally stopped. Euron broke 2 oars in half and used his dagger to carve them into splints. Glenn contributed the last of his foot bindings to serve as bandages. Once the splints were in place, Euron raised Hawk's injured leg and placed it on a rum barrel. In the moonlight, the wounded man's pale face, pale from blood loss, finally showed a glimmer of life. Dagmo squatted in the pool of blood, his one eye fixed on the intricately crafted splint. "Where did you learn that from?" "The drowned god taught me in a dream." Euron wiped his face with his bloodied hand, his heterochromatic eyes gleaming eerily in the moonlight, and chuckled. "Do you believe me or not?" Dagmor was skeptical, while Baron scoffed. "I believe you." "My foot." Last month, Vincent Ryan fell off Blackwater Cliff and broke his leg. A female doctor from the north sawed off his broken leg, and that's what she did to stop the bleeding. This brat was watching the whole thing, probably just copying what he saw. Chapter 7. The First Battle of the Havoc. Day 12 at sea. The midday sun baked the deck of the drinking spree until it was scorching hot, and the tar between the planks sizzled. Euron was crouching at the bow, observing the cloud formations using the method Dagmor had taught him, when suddenly the lookout's cawing came from the lookout tower. "Sails. 30 degrees to port." Euron looked up sharply and saw the gilded figurehead of the Silver Swan gleaming blindingly in the sunlight on the distant sea. He narrowed his heterochromatic eyes, the pitch black of his left eye and the ice blue of his right eye simultaneously catching something unusual. The waterline of this Bravo's merchant ship was abnormally deep, and the chaos on the deck was too deliberate. "Prepare for boarding," Baron roared, his voice laced with bloodlust. He ripped open his leather armor, revealing a scarred chest, his longsword gleaming coldly in the sunlight. The surrounding Ironborn grabbed their weapons, axes and harpoons striking the deck in a chilling rhythm. Euron suddenly felt a sharp pain in his fingertips. His blood boiled instantly, and memories of the original story flooded back. He remembered the traps the Bravos often used, warships disguised as merchant ships. "Wait!" Euron grabbed Baron's wrist. The 5-year-old's hand was less than half the size of an adult's, yet surprisingly strong. "This isn't right. The Bravos people never." Before he finished speaking, the side planks of the merchant ship opposite him crashed down, revealing 10 crossbows gleaming with a cold light. In Euron's vision, time seemed to stretch out. He saw the crossbowmen drawing their bows, saw the cold light reflecting off the steel arrows in the sunlight, and even saw the fletching of the arrows tremble slightly in the air. "Hidden!" Dagmo's roar rang out simultaneously with the whooshing sound of the first volley. A 3-foot-long steel arrow pierced the chest of the oarsman beside Euron, pinning him to the mainmast with flesh and blood. The man was still alive, his hands futilely clutching the arrow shaft in his chest, pinkish blood spurting from his mouth and splashing onto Euron's face. Euron's mind went blank. Warm blood streamed down his cheeks, the salty, metallic taste filling his nostrils. His legs trembled uncontrollably, but some more primal instinct took over. By the time the second volley of arrows came, his body had already rolled behind the pile of cables. "Baron! Engage the enemy on starboard." Dagmo's roar came from afar. Euron peeked through the gaps in the ropes and saw his brother leap onto the enemy's ship like a beast. Baron's longsword drew a deadly arc, and a Bravos mercenary wearing a bronze mask had just raised his scimitar when half his head was cleaved off. Brain matter arced through the air, splattering onto the gilded hull and gleaming eerily in the sunlight. "Little sea monster." To the left. Old Wick's shout made Euron turn his head sharply. A captain with a silver nose ring was charging towards the barrel with a torch, a sinister grin clearly visible on his face. In Euron's vision, the cluster of leaping flames was magnified infinitely, and the trajectory of the flames licking the air was clearly discernible. Time seemed to stand still. Euron felt his heart pounding loudly, the sound of his blood surging through his veins like a tsunami. His right hand automatically reached for his waist, drawing the dagger Dagmo had given him, a weapon longer than his forearm, yet now felt as light as a feather. "Die, you ironborn bastard," came the roar of the silver-nosed man. Euron's body reacted before his mind. He ducked and rolled to avoid the flying torch, while his right hand thrust out with the dagger like a venomous snake. The sharp blade precisely sliced into the tendon gap of his opponent's knee, and the scream of the man with the silver nose rang out at the same time as the torch fell into the sea. "Ugh, you little brat." Euron didn't give him a chance to finish. Using the momentum of his roll, he got up, grabbed the harpoon on the deck with his left hand, and plunged it into the other man's throat with his full weight. The sound of the harpoon piercing his throat was dull and wet, and the silver-nosed man's eyes widened, blood gushing from the corner of his mouth. This was Euron's first murder. The stench of blood was overwhelming. He looked down at his blood-stained hands, and strangely, he didn't feel nauseous. Instead, he felt a peculiar sense of satisfaction. The darkness in his left eye seemed to deepen, as if it could absorb all the light around it. "Watch out behind you." Dagmar's warning made Euron turn around abruptly. A bald, giant man was charging at him, wielding a chain mace, the mace still covered in brains and bone fragments. Euron instinctively leaned back, the chain mace whistling past his nose, the force of the wind stinging his cheek. Euron's gaze automatically locked onto the other man's slightly stiff left leg. He grabbed a handful of scattered salt grains from the ground and flung them at the giant's face. In the instant the giant closed his eyes, the dagger precisely pierced the old wound on his left knee. Ah! The giant fell to his knees, and the chain hammer flew out of his hand. Euron didn't hesitate. He stepped on the man's back, gripped the dagger hilt with both hands, and thrust downwards with his full weight. The blade pierced through the leather armor and embedded itself in the spine. The giant's scream abruptly stopped. His body convulsed violently a few times like a fish pulled from the water, then remained still. The battle on deck had reached a fever pitch. Baron and a red-bearded mercenary were wrestling in a pool of blood, both their weapons knocked away, now reduced to a brutal, bestial struggle. Dagmor was surrounded by 3 mercenaries. His battle axe had chipped, but with each swing, a limb flew off. In the bloody boarding action, the Iron Islands warriors displayed their unique fighting style. Euron, leaning against the wrecked side of the ship, watched this savage yet efficient art of killing, panting. "Ironmen! Let them taste the old way," Dagmor roared like thunder. This old pirate fought in the quintessential Ironman style. He wielded a short-handled battle axe with spikes forged into its back in his left hand, and a serrated dagger in his right. Each attack was like a relentless tide, devoid of fancy moves, only the most direct and deadly slashes. When the first Bravo's mercenary raised his shield to block, Dagmor's axe slammed into the shield, numbing the enemy's arm, and then his dagger plunged into the enemy's abdomen from beneath the shield. "Watch closely, kid," Wick didn't forget to teach Euron amidst the melee. "Ironmen don't use knightly tricks." He dodged a thrust to the side and slammed his shoulder into his opponent's chest, sending both of them crashing onto the deck. In the instant they fell, Wick's headbutt shattered his opponent's nose, followed by biting down on his ear and tearing off a chunk of flesh. Euron was both shocked and fascinated by this brutal fighting style. He noticed that the Ironborn generally used short weapons, battle axes, scimitars, and harpoons, and almost no longswords. These weapons were more maneuverable on the narrow decks. During his time at sea, the sailors had taught Euron how to fight, and he had a general understanding, but none of it could be equated with real killing. "A longsword is a hindrance on a ship." Balon's voice came from the midst of the fighting, confirming Euron's observation. His brother was fighting with a scimitar shorter and thicker than the ones commonly found in Westeros, with a serrated back. Each of Balon's swings had a rhythmic quality like ocean waves, his body naturally adjusting its center of gravity with the ship's swaying. When a mercenary thrust his sword, Balon didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped forward to meet the blade, parrying with his scimitar while simultaneously drawing a skinning dagger from his waist with his left hand and plunging it upwards into the man's chin. The Ironborn were masters of close-quarters combat. Euron saw old Wick even throw away his weapon and start punching his enemy with his fists, adorned with brass knuckles. This old sailor, missing 2 fingers, aimed every punch at the eyes, throat, and groin. "There are no rules in sea fighting. Only life and death," he shouted, spitting out a broken tooth and laughing. What struck Euron most was the Ironborn's fighting spirit. A sailor with a harpoon piercing his chest lunged at his enemy before dying, biting through his throat with his teeth. Another warrior, his abdomen slashed open, knelt on the ground, still wielding his axe until his last drop of blood was drawn. They were like reefs in the sea, relentlessly battering against you, no matter how fierce the wind and waves. "Remember, kid," Dagmo said, panting between battles, "the Ironborn are not afraid to die, for the drowned god will bring us back to life." He spat out a mouthful of blood, "But make the enemy afraid to die." With that, he grabbed a wounded mercenary and amidst the man's agonizing screams, gouged out an eyeball and shoved it into the man's mouth. This cruelty wasn't just about killing, it was also a psychological tactic. Euron noticed that the mercenaries who witnessed this scene were visibly shrinking back, while the Ironborn became even more frenzied. They let out shrill cries like seagulls, swarming like a school of bloodthirsty piranhas towards their prey, fully embodying the Ironborn's fighting code. I may not live, but you must die. As a mercenary turned to flee, Euron instinctively grabbed a fishing net from the deck and threw it. The instant the net caught his target, he pounced and stabbed him repeatedly with his dagger until the man stopped struggling. As he stood up, he realized he was letting out the same seabird-like triumphant scream as the other Ironborn. After the battle, Euron looked at his bloodied hands and gained a deeper understanding of the Iron Islands' philosophy of survival. At sea, elegant swordsmanship is meaningless. Only the most savage, direct, and fearless warriors survive. Like waves crashing against rocks, either the rocks are worn down or the waves are shattered. Euron suddenly noticed something amiss in the cabin, the cold glint of chains peeking out from the gaps in the jewelry chests that had been carelessly discarded. He risked approaching, pried open one chest with his dagger, and gasped. It was filled with shackles and chains. He could vaguely hear heavy breathing coming from below the cabin, and the blood on the deck had seeped in. Euron tapped the deck, making a crisp sound, and lifted a blood-stained carpet. After pulling up a rusty iron ring, he saw more than a dozen pairs of terrified eyes and many black rocks below the cabin. A slave ship. This is a merchant ship disguised as a slave ship. Euron's shout pierced the battlefield, his tone tinged with disappointment and anger. The lower decks are filled with stones, and more than a dozen slaves. This news enraged the already bloodthirsty Ironborn, who brandished their swords and axes without pause, spewing insults that could drown the mercenaries. By the time the last mercenary's neck was snapped by Baron, the setting sun had already dyed the sea blood-red. Euron slumped onto the deck, only then realizing that his clothes were already soaked with sweat and blood. He had a deep, bone-revealing wound on his left arm, but strangely, he felt almost no pain. The still alive and energetic Iron people searched everywhere for gold and silver treasures. Baron dragged his injured left leg over and looked at his brother with respect for the first time. "You saved my life." He grinned, his missing front tooth making his smile look particularly sinister in the setting sun. After the battle, Euron had used up almost all his strength in those few short moves. He leaned against the cabin, panting heavily, and casually waved his hand at his brother's thanks. Dagmor, enraged, swung his sword wildly in the captain's cabin of the Silver Swan. "You sons of bitches. 8 brothers' lives for this piece of junk. The spoils, aside from a dozen or so trembling slaves, all male, contain no gold or silver." It was a failed raid. If he returned with a ship full of sand, Crackthorn, Dagmor's reputation would become a joke, and all the Ironborn of the Iron Islands would laugh at him until the drowned god took him away. Euron wasn't surprised that the battle had been fruitless. He struggled to his feet and walked to the bow of the ship. The sea breeze strung his wounds. He gazed at the distant horizon and suddenly smiled. "Have you considered this?" Euron's voice wasn't loud, but it silenced the restless sailors. "Why send an armed ship to patrol this area?" He pointed to the captured nautical chart. "Look here, they just resupplied 3 days ago. Over 30 fully armed mercenaries, just to escort a few dozen slaves." Dagmor's one eye lit up. "Kid, you mean? There must be even bigger prey ahead." Euron's heterochromatic eyes gleamed in the twilight. "Merchant ships laden with gold, spices, and women. Leave a few alive," Dagmor roared, his voice echoing across the deck. "I'll interrogate them myself." Ding. First naval battle completed. Pirate King system activation increased by 5%, currently at 85%. Chapter 8, Torture and Looting. When Dagmor's skinning dagger pierced the first prisoner's thumb, the screams that erupted on the deck were more piercing than those of seagulls being harpooned. The bones are the drowning god's harp. The finger bones are the drowning god's keys, The old pirate hummed a tuneless ballad in a hoarse voice, his wrist flicking, the blade moving nimbly like a bloodthirsty silver fish. Skin rolled upwards from the fingertips, revealing the slightly trembling, bright red tendons beneath. Drops of blood rolled down the gleaming silver blade, congealing in the pale moonlight into a broken, eerily beautiful ruby necklace. The spice ship's course. Number of guards. Speak, Baron Grage's roar drowned out the sticky sounds of flesh being torn apart. The prisoner convulsed, uttering a few incoherent, broken syllables. Baron's battle axe did not hesitate for a moment. Snap. His little finger was severed at the base, a piece of white bone bouncing on the deck and rolling to Euron's sea salt-stained boot. Liar! Grage's eldest son kicked the severed finger into the dark sea, the cold axe blade already moving towards the ring finger. I'll ask one last time. Please, please, let me go. Baron grinned, revealing teeth stained yellow by sea salt. Wrong answer. With a swift motion, another finger left the body. Then he tapped the prisoner's still intact right pinky with the blood-stained back of his axe. Which compartment is the Rhys's gems stored in? The prisoner bit his bleeding lips tightly. A flash of cold light from the axe blade. Snap. His little finger was severed at the root, and flying bone fragments and blood stained Euron's leather boots. The intense pain finally broke through the dam of his will, and the prisoner screamed hoarsely, "Port. Second cargo, hold on port." Euron, who had been observing coldly, finally moved. He extended the tip of his boot and touched an old arrow wound on the prisoner's right shoulder, this mark left by a triangular arrowhead. You've risked your life for money. You were a mercenary. He bent down, grabbed a handful of damp, rusty iron filings mixed with salt, and ruthlessly pressed them deep into the old wound, grinding new flesh against the old scar. A mercenary's eyes are on the blade. Their primary concern is life and death, victory and defeat, so they must know exactly how many warriors on their side can wield a sword. How many exactly? Under the precise onslaught of excruciating pain and terror, the prisoner completely broke down. 9. Only 9. Including 2 unarmed servants. It's true. Free trade port. They're flying the Bravo's flag. The third prisoner muttered after his mental breakdown. 2 hours later, the information extracted from the 3 prisoners, who had been interrogated separately, pieced together like planks washed ashore by the waves, finally formed a complete and alluring picture. 2 merchant ships, laden with rare spices from Tyros, the softest silks of Mill, and the coveted gems of Rise, their guards laughably weak, numbering only 9. Dagmo licked the half-congealed blood from his dagger, his eyes, stained crimson with greed and slaughter, fixed intently on the inky black horizon to the northeast. Tomorrow night, at moonset, they will surely pass through Widow's Gorge. Did you all understand? Euron's voice was low and calm. He even offered a little stale water to 3 barely conscious, unrecognizable prisoners. He half-squatted before them, the moonlight casting half of his face into deep darkness, the other half as cold as a sculpture. Tomorrow night, the moon will set. Widow's Gorge, 2 ships, 9 men. If this intelligence is even slightly wrong, if anything goes wrong with this hunt. He paused, his voice chilling with a coldness more biting than the ice of the North Ocean. I swear to the drowning gods, you will regret not having told the truth now. They will start by skinning you, then slice by slice, slowly cutting away your flesh, and finally tie you to the reefs, letting the rising tide gnaw away at your exposed bones for days and nights. He subtly shifted his tone, adding a touch of almost benevolent seduction. But if everything goes smoothly, perhaps you can still save your lives. You must already know my name and identity. On this sea, those I protect are hard to take away, even by death. So now, think carefully. Is there anything else I forgot to say? Anything useful? Extreme fear can sometimes extract the deepest secrets. After a brief, deathly silence, broken only by the mournful sound of the waves, a faint voice squeezed out. "A will-o'-the-wisp. Will-o'-the-wisp, an older and deadlier creation than wildfire, extremely flammable, like liquid rage from purgatory. Long ago, some merchant ships walking on the edge of danger would secretly keep a few barrels, hiding them in the most concealed hold, as bargaining chips in final negotiations or weapons for mutual destruction when faced with dire straits. But its raw materials were rare, and the art of its preparation was tightly held by a very few known as fire sorcerers. Now, those fire sorcerers have long been kept by the mad King of Kings, landing with the wealth of the entire kingdom. Who could have imagined that such a dangerous secret was hidden on this seemingly ordinary merchant ship? Barren and rending grim, Dagmo exchanged a sharp glance, instantly filling the air with a new and more dangerous aura of greed. Then their gazes simultaneously fell upon Euron. In their eyes was undisguised admiration and awe, the kind of gaze a wild beast would show upon discovering a larger prey. On the 14th day of the voyage, the night was as dark as ink. As the last glimmer of moonlight was swallowed by the churning clouds, the drinking ship, like a sea serpent covered in black scales, silently slid into the jagged reefs. The hull almost blended into the roaring darkness, with only the peeling paint on the figurehead occasionally gleaming faintly in the foam. Euron Greyjoy lay crouching behind the bow, his nose catching a whiff of exotic scent on the wind. The warm sweetness of nutmeg mingled with the somberness of sandalwood, a luxurious blend clashing with the salty, briny air and the faint scent of blood in the sea breeze. A silent grin spread across his face, like a shark that had caught the scent of death. The merchant fleet was completely unaware of this. Like docile lambs, they slowly sailed into the deadly strait. On the deck of the lead ship, under the dim glow of two lanterns, two guards were jostling and shoving each other over a deflated wine sack. Their voices were muffled by the crashing waves, their eyes clouded, utterly oblivious to the fact that, in the shadows of the dark reefs on either side, the horn strings of 12 longbows had been drawn to a cold, full moon. Put! The Captain Dagmo's roar was swallowed up by the giant waves crashing against the shore. The poisoned arrow, coated with owl dung, was released and silently disappeared into the darkness. The next moment, the guards on deck fell one after another like stalks of wheat cut down by an invisible scythe. Arrows trembled in their throats, and even their final sobs did not disturb the night. Almost simultaneously, Baron Greyjoy's grappling hook had already gripped the enemy's ship's side. Swinging along the rope like a lithe ape, his curved blade slashing a chilling arc in midair. The archer on the watchtower had just noticed something amiss when his throat was slit open with a warm gash. Clutching the gushing blood from his neck, he fell silently into the churning, inky sea below. The Ironborn's raids displayed a chilling efficiency honed through countless trials. Old Wick led a team of men like phantoms into the cargo hold, swiftly covering the barrels marked with danger symbols, containing ghost fire, the kind of fire that could ignite hellfire at the slightest spark, with heavy, seawater-soaked blankets. A young squire's hands trembled violently with fear, barely able to hold his torch. Without hesitation, Old Wick swiftly slashed, and the young man's head rolled onto the damp deck, a look of astonishment on his face. On the other side, Glenn's skinning knife precisely found the helmsman's ankle. The tip of the knife flicked, and the subtle sound of tendons snapping was drowned out by the noise. The helmsman, who had once been in control of the helm, now slumped down like a lump of mud. On the deck, Dagmo roared, his voice drowning out the wind and waves as he trudged through the sticky, chaotic mess. The drowned god only takes souls, not cargo. Throw all the dead overboard to feed the fish, and don't damage a single piece of cargo. You little bastards, keep your eyes peeled, or I'll skin you alive. His voice was rough like a rock, every word dripping with greed and bloodlust, echoing across the sea, suddenly invaded by death, as if it were a final prayer offered to this dark sacrifice. Chapter 9. The Song of Iron Coins. The tide has turned, the battle has ended. Our black sails blotted out the midday sun. We haven't been paid for the goods in our hands. It was paid in ancient and courageous iron coins. So fill the rum and make the campfire burn bright. Sing aloud for the desire of every departed soul. The dead do not die. They will surely rise again under this sky, even more rampant than before. Their ship's planks were cracked, and their flag had been lowered. They sent their master to underwater paradise. We seized their wine and plundered their food. They abandoned their dreams beside the corpses. So fill the rum and make the campfire burn bright. The ocean will devour both the weak and the strong. The drowning god knew that we had nowhere to go, cultivating the land or kneeling to pray for blessings. We are the storms that end the day. Iron coins are our only creed. Iron coins. Before we sink. There. The sailors sang the iron coins song at the top of their lungs, with Baron standing at the bow, drinking heavily and waving his hands as if he were conducting the band. This was Euron's first time hearing this wild pirate song, and he wanted to drink with the other Ironborn, but the bottle was snatched away from him by Old Wick as soon as it was passed to him. The deck of the HMS Grand Drinker was piled high with spoils, gleaming alluringly in the midday sun. Euron squatted on an oak barrel, watching the sailors sort and arrange the loot. His gaze was drawn to bolts of oriental silk, black cashmere from Korhol that shimmered like pearls in the sunlight, more exquisite than the tapestries in the homes of the wealthiest merchants in Pike City. The sailors pounced on the pried-open cargo crates like hungry wolves, their rough fingers tearing at the silks, spices, and gleaming gold and silver vessels. Crack! Dagmor kicked open the oak door to the captain's cabin, dragging out a pearl-encrusted iron chest and chopping open the latch with an axe. Crash! Piles of mill gold coins tumbled onto the deck, shimmering like fish scales in the sunlight. Gods above! An old sailor with a missing front tooth grabbed a handful of gold coins, stuffed them into his mouth, and bit them to make dents. Real gold. Purer than what was dug out of the old Wake Island mines. Look at this. Redhead Oakwood held up a goblet studded with rubies, the rim still stained with deep red wine. The private collection of the Bravo's banker. His smile, missing 2 front teeth, looked particularly menacing in the sunlight, and fresh blood still seeped from a new scar on his forehead. Old One-Eyed Wolf knelt before a pile of spices, his trembling fingers picking up a pinch of safflower and inhaling deeply. Gods above, he choked out, his voice hoarse. This was my wife's favorite scent before she became paralyzed. He carefully wrapped the spices in a piece of cloth torn from his clothes and tucked it into his leather pouch. This old pirate didn't love his paralyzed, ugly wife. He knew this spice was worth its weight in gold. Dagmor laughed heartily, a few drops of saliva spilling from his split jaw. Everyone grab a handful first. The rest, he glanced at Baron. According to the Iron Islands rules, the captain gets 30%, the warriors get a larger share, and the rest goes to the Greyjoy family. The sailors cheered and rushed toward the spoils. Some wrapped Bravo's silk scarves around their necks, while others filled silver goblets with strong liquor and drank it down. A burly man with a scarred face even put on a captured gilded breastplate on the spot, even though it was as small as a plate to him. The prisoners in the cabin were driven onto the deck. The Bravo's merchants and sailors, chained together, knelt pale-faced on the blood-stained deck. The women, 3 trembling girls, were brought before Baron alone. According to the old ways, the men would be slaves, mining iron in the Iron Islands until death. The women, if any Iron Lords wanted them, would become salt concubines. If no Iron Lords wanted them, they would be the toys of all the Iron Lords. "These two are yours, Baron," Dagmor grinned and nudged the two older girls. The first was a Dornish girl, about 14 years old, with olive skin still streaked with sand, her green silk dress soaked through by the sea and clinging to her body. Anger burned in her dark eyes, yet her lips were stubbornly pursed, like a wildcat cornered. The second one was from Tyrosi, a little older, about 16, with a white film over her amber right eye, like a punctured fish bladder. She had a purple lotus tattooed on her ankle, the mark of the Tyrosi brothel, and a jingling gold bell on her wrist. Baron was satisfied, his lecherous gaze sweeping over them, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "Take them back, soak them in salt water, and they'll be iron-blood women." But Euron's gaze fell on the third girl. She was younger than the other two, no more than 12 years old, thin as a reed, her pale golden hair tousled by the sea breeze. She didn't cry, nor did she glare at them like the girl from Dawn. She simply stood quietly, her blue eyes seeming to see right through people. "What's your name?" Euron asked. The girl looked up, her voice as soft as a sea breeze. "Lisa." "Where did you come from?" "Pentos," she said in her common with a soft, exotic accent. "But my mother is from Bravos, and my father is a merchant from Rhys. I speak 7 languages." Euron raised an eyebrow. 7 kinds. She nodded, then suddenly switched to High Valyrian. "Valadoheris, all men must serve." She then switched to Dothraki. "Anha Vadarako Vitiherat, I have seen the sunset over the plains." Finally, she uttered a few words of difficult Giscalian ancient language. Dagmo whistled. "This little brat's mouth's faster than a parrot's." Euron looked at Baron. "I want her." Baron snorted. "How old are you?" "How old is she?" "She hasn't even started her period yet. It's too early for her to become a concubine." "I won't be a salt-serving concubine," Euron said. "I prefer to be a maidservant. I like young girls to serve me." Baron stared at his younger brother for a moment, then suddenly grinned. "Suit yourself. If father asks, you can explain yourself." He winked and teased. "You little rascal, when you look for a woman, find one like this." He pointed to the 2 large-breasted, big-bottomed exotic girls he was holding in his arms, their faces radiating allure. "Run." Euron shrugged, unimpressed. Compared to her physical abilities, the ability to speak 7 languages was far more valuable. Her simple clothes and messy hair seemed more like a disguise. Her hands and face were covered in mud, but her skin was incredibly smooth, indicating that she had never done any dirty or strenuous work. Her demeanor was more like that of a pampered noblewoman. The Hayin returned fully loaded, its draft half a foot higher than when it arrived. The deck was piled high with spoils: glassware from Bravos, lace from Mer, barrels of wine from Greentree Island, and even a few exquisitely crafted Valyrian steel daggers. Though second-rate, they were enough to make the Ironborn envious. The sailors sang vulgar pirate songs in a drunken stupor, and some tied stolen silk scarves to the masts, letting them flutter in the wind like ostentatious flags. Baron stood at the bow, one arm around the waist of the Dornish girl. She had stopped struggling and was simply staring coldly at the sea. The one-eyed girl from Tyroth sat at his feet, combing her wet hair with a gold comb she had captured. Euron's handmaid, Lisa, stood quietly behind him, her grey-blue eyes reflecting the afterglow of the setting sun. Dagmo took a swig of the golden wine from Kingting Island and laughed heartily. This trip was worth it. They harvested a lot of gold and silver jewelry, but it could not replace fresh water and bread. The merchant ship was scheduled to arrive at the port in another day, so it didn't have much food or fresh water stored, only wine that it was going to trade. Of course, the Hao Yin, Chinese letter, couldn't just dock at a merchant ship's port immediately after plundering it. It had only one option: to return quickly. So, in the last few days of the voyage, the shortage of food and fresh water caused everyone's lips to crack and bleed, and their gums to swell and fester. Euron sat in a corner of the deck, chewing on a piece of mouldy, hard bread, maggots wriggling on his tongue. He no longer vomited, no longer hesitated. Like all ironborn, his stomach was accustomed to decay and saltiness. The sea never offered the Ironmen romantic adventures, but rather maggots, thirst, and the drudgery of survival, yet they still yearned for the next voyage. That's the Ironmen. Chapter 10, Conqueror's Haki. The 20th day of the voyage. When the black tower of Pike Place finally appeared on the horizon, the sailors did not cheer. They simply licked their chapped lips in silence, their eyes fixed on the fresh water barrels and the smoke from the roasting meat on the shore. Euron stood at the bow, watching Lisa wipe the dragon crystal compass, a trophy Dagmar had secretly given him, with a black cloth embroidered with gold thread. The girl's fingers were slender and dexterous, and as she murmured in High Valyrian, the compass's rim gleamed with a ghostly blue light. She says it's a beacon of blood and fire. Dagmar's single eye gleamed in the twilight. Young prince, you've struck gold. The waves gently caressed the ship's hull, and Euron's shoulder wound had already scabbed over. He gazed at the gradually emerging silhouette of Pike Place City, knowing that this voyage would forever change something, perhaps the future of the Iron Islands, perhaps his own destiny. The 20-day voyage had finally allowed Euron's long-awaited Pirate King system to be fully activated. One peace system bound to host, Euron Grey. Synchronizing with world laws, adapting to low magic planes, loading complete. Chinese letter, 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 100/200/400/800/1600/3000. Remaining free attribute points, 0. 0/100. Basic rewards, data-driven character panel. The values within parentheses represent the standard values for a normal adult male in Westeros. Strength 410, child's body, insufficient punching power, wild dog. Agility 610, balance tempered by sea breeze. Physical strength 410, broken ribs, old injury drags down blood oxygen. Spirit 1210, soul fusion breakthrough threshold. Command 810, the initial formation of the divine aura. Charm 910, the allure of heterochromia plus the legend of the drowning god's son. Luck CAF, F is the worst or is the best, a special attribute full of variables. System activation reward. Conqueror's Haki, LV1 passive, cannot be actively controlled, only released unconsciously in the eyes or throughout the body when emotions fluctuate violently, such as anger, fear, or life-threatening situations. Mental intimidation, weak people retreat, upgrade to LV2, 2,000 points. Euron was both pleasantly surprised and somewhat disappointed. Surprisingly, he gained the rarest ability in one piece, Conqueror's Haki, representing the potential to become a king. Disappointingly, while Conqueror's Haki is touted as the most effective ability to clear out mobs in the anime, in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, this skill is not that powerful and cannot knock people unconscious with a single blow. However, the appearance of LV1 later indicates that this ability can be upgraded, and there are unlimited possibilities in the future. It is possible that it can be done after upgrading to a higher level. Currently, Level 1 Conqueror's Haki is a passive skill, spreading outwards from Euron with a radius of approximately 10 steps. Its effects include: some people perceive you as possessing a kingly aura, inspiring them to submit. Others are more deeply impressed by you, becoming wary. Recruiting certain individuals becomes easier as they feel awe. Some weaker individuals, psychologically and physiologically, experience fear and dare not resist, and enemies under its pressure suffer a decrease in strength, agility, and mental fortitude, and may even experience illusions and hallucinations. Every 100 points earned can be redeemed for rewards in the One Piece system, with rewards given randomly. There are many ways to earn points. Exploring new continents, such as Sothroth, discovering new races, children of the forest White Walkers, consuming special food for the first time, defeating famous figures, points awarded based on strength, etc. Rewards may include skills, talents, or items. Thinking about the various haki, the amazing devil fruits, the 6 powers of the Navy, and the various magical foods in One Piece, Euron suddenly felt that the unknown was full of hope. The moment